So welcome to the node.js package maintenance team meeting for May 24th, 2022. We'll follow the agenda that was tagged in the issue, which was issue number 528. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share?
I feel very relieved after submitting my talk to OpenJS World yesterday. It's a lot of work, but feels good. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so OpenJS World is in 2 weeks. I think that's a good thing to mention as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, well, if there weren't any other announcements, so I'm going to say let's go on to the first agenda item, which is 522, which is session at Collaborator Summit, which I think is what you were talking about, right?
Or yeah, just trying to make a graceful transition. Yeah, I remember during the last session, I know we had talked about this, and I was willing to help, but just need to get that milestone out of the way. So I'm not sure if there's any new news or action items, but I have a little bit more bandwidth now. If there's any updates on that.
Okay. I see, right. You submitted you were talking about putting together your own talk versus the one for the collab session.
Yeah, I just couldn't do both, but the virtual track had to hand theirs in yesterday.
Okay. I was thinking, am I behind on something?
No.
Good.
I'm not in person. I opted for the virtual track. I just needed.
And they wanted those earlier.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, the first issue is, do we want to have a session? And I think Owen, you'd mentioned maybe something from PKGS, like a GitHub action matrix. I think Dominicus, you mentioned in there a session about PKGS action. Oh, but you can't make the session even remotely. So right, okay.
I know it's Darcy's. Oh, God, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just confirming. Yeah, can't make it this year.
I know it's Darcy's comment about maybe doing a co-event with the NPM team, which could be really nice. I think there's maybe some natural synergy there, because potentially there's RFCs that maybe, could use spiking or, user land tools that might not make it into NPM or vice versa, but there could be some good cross-pollination, even if just those two groups are in the same room without even a strict agenda, I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. But he offered to co-host, to set up something. So, just having if you build it, they will come. So, I won't be there, unfortunately. I don't know if there's any virtual opportunities outside of just any streams, but if I was going, I would certainly.
Well, I think once we have the timeline, we should be able to maybe at least open a laptop that people can get in on a Zoom. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing if people want to try and join in the conversation.
Yeah, to pop open your Zoom from impromptu on-demand live stream. Yeah, that could work. I could definitely like you said, if the times are set or whatnot, then with a little advance notice, I'm sure I could certainly join for that. Not sure how long it would be, but
I'm happy to open up the laptop for that.
Yeah,
I like Darcy's idea of just saying, let's have a blank session and plan to get together. If he, Roy, myself, I think Beth are going to be there in person, and then there may be some others Nathan, you're going to be there. We can't hear you.
I'm on the NPM team under Darcy as well, so
okay.
I'll be there.
Okay, great. Cool. So I'm just typing in that I think that's a great idea. And if Darcy's willing to submit and run the session, that sounds great. So I'll post that in the chat. And I guess we can go from there. And yeah, like, for everybody else, we'll try and open up a laptop and let people remote in too. On your comment about the NPM session, I did also, it did conflict with some of the node ones. And I suggested maybe it'd be good to put that at a different time so it wouldn't. So I think the last schedule I saw anyway, put that one where it didn't conflict with any of the other node sessions. So, because I definitely see a lot of overlapping interest there. Okay, so I think we've covered off that one. Sounds like we've got volunteer. Darcy will submit and run a session, which sounds good. I think one of the things we could chat about too is this next one, how to accelerate the modernization of the ecosystem. I think that's a rather large topic, and maybe better suited for the kind of in-person discussion. So if we're looking for topics, that might be a good one as well. Because I think we chatted a little bit last time, but there's no obvious. It's one of those, everybody sticks with what they've got until they have to move, right? And,
And I don't know if others perceive like the split between CJS and ESM, because I know it's fairly common in browser land to kind of treat ES 2015 as kind of this new stake in the ground of like feature detection, progressive enhancement. If the browser supports ESM, it's probably got class and promise and things like that. Seems to be a bit more contentious in the NPM ecosystem. And, I guess I'm not sure if it's, captured in the original post, like what modernization means, if it just means just please keep updating your dependencies so, you don't get nailed by a security vulnerability or some but to your point, you think about like tutorials and stuff like that, who's going to change them. The downside is someone could still be using them to, you see a blog post, you maybe don't see that it was published in 2014, you just start running the commands or something like that. But I think maybe if we can get a sense, albeit maybe a fuzzy one, of what modernization means, if it just means better hygiene with your dependencies, if it means actually pivoting on certain features in the package manager or the runtime, like ESM, it's like the next generation. Like I don't know if that's fair.
I think it's like that,
but that's
that modernization started the discussion, like just saying ESM is more modern, that there was not even consensus on that, right? So like,
right,
you can get into quite the discussion about what modernization means. I think the key point was not like what modern means, but was like, I think they used the example of not fetch.
Last releases.
No, what was prefetch? Requests, right?
Right.
It's clearly deprecated, has been deprecated, and yet still has tons and tons of use, right? And I think that's kind of what the starting point was like. I think it would be less contentious, as you said. We want to encourage people to use non-deprecated things, right? And even though sorry, go ahead.
No, finish. Sorry.
I mean, even that is going to be a challenge, right? Like if, it's sometimes it's maybe buried in a dependency of something else, right? But
I mean, I guess because looking at the table at the bottom of the original post, I think maybe you have a much better case in the scenario where something has literally been deprecated. That's pretty clear signal, but then it's mixed in with other packages that it seems the only criteria is just their last published version. And, I don't know, I guess it seems, to me, it almost seems like if I think about how, I'm not sure if you've heard of Socket, the new company by Feroz that's trying to examine vulnerability and like malware intent in packages. And it's less about like static analysis, but maybe more like, this package just released a patch release and all it did was add a post install script. That seems kind of sketchy, things like that. So I don't know if maybe the shape of the conversation and where, the synergy between NPM and this group is, more of like a how to evaluate and analyze packages you are and aren't using, so you can take a holistic look, like almost like a weighting scale. It's like last major release or update, that weighs this much, health of the main, I don't know, is it more of just things, more like a guide for shopping for packages, or like we're going to draw a line in the sand, and if your package falls under this line, then that's wrong, kind of thing.
That's
because everybody still uses Express. I mean, right?
As Nathan mentioned, that starts to get integration. We could probably have long discussions. Right. The original one example of like something that's deprecated though, like I know early on we did some, and I think Dominicus, you ran some of the tooling that captured like, here are the most used packages, right? I don't know if it'd be interesting.
I was running things about what people are testing in. So that is a good point in that request has been deprecated and it hasn't been getting tested in new versions of Node or whatnot, which is it a problem though? Like seriously, I just literally just installed request and ran npm audit and it reported 0 vulnerabilities. So what's the problem?
Yeah, so I think the original issue, like, and I actually suggested they come here because I think it's the most likely to see a group of like, we're interested in maintaining packages.
Yeah.
Does it, like you said, is there a problem? Would it make any sense? Like if we generated those stats and said, here's the top downloaded deprecated modules, would it make any sense for us to write some blog posts that says, stop using blah, blah, and blah, right? Like, because that's the one thing I could think of we could do, right? But would that make any difference? Would it matter? Is it, does it add value? I don't know. That's it.
I mean, there is a couple of deprecation warnings that you get when you install request. There's the UID, which has a note about math random, which could remotely lead to security issues. But if it works, if all the tests pass, is it a problem?
It's more one of these things like using an existing app, your risk is higher to replace it with something else, probably, right? On the other hand, if you're writing a new app, you probably don't want to use it just strictly because today there's no vulnerabilities, but like if you want to keep 0 vulnerabilities, what are you going to do if there is one reported? That ends up, or any one of its dependencies, that becomes painful, right?
Does request have any dependencies?
Oh yeah, plenty.
Oh, okay.
It's a big module, which is maybe why there's no direct replacement, right? For it, there's you need to combine yourself.
I guess it's one of the things I've observed in the contributions to the Node website there, and I think rightfully so, like their avoidance of like creating pages that are just like links to a whole bunch of other things, kind of walking that line between picking winners and losers or something like that. I think is, fairly, for a project as large as Node, it's makes a lot of sense, as opposed to like a React saying like, here's a couple recommendations for how to start a full stack React app, that's, but, I think maybe the value in the conversation is more, at least in my opinion, I think a lot of the value could be derived is how to, as a consumer looking at a package, what could I look for to give me some confidence that this is the right package for me, which is probably more based on your requirements, but like I said, kind of thinking about like how Faraz and his team are critically evaluating kind of more like the softer side of package maintenance, looking for those kind of odd crevices and weird patch releases that do shady stuff, is it more along the lines of, so I guess is it,
Can we,
these are old things and here are new things, look at the new things, or as you're looking across the ecosystem, if you find something that like, wow, this fits my use case, what are some quick things like in the GitHub repo, but then you get into like, just because it hasn't been maintained for a little while, you get people that are like, I haven't seen a commit in a month. Is this project dead? It's like, I don't want to lead to those kind of issues either, So like, can anything be hard and fast in this industry? I don't know. And is it the place of this team to say that, or is it just, broad strokes, here's how to evaluate an NPM page in a GitHub repo. And, like if it's just for a side project, not a big deal. Is it for your enterprise? I mean, maybe you've got a team that tells you, but.
Maybe we need to start writing down some of these things. So if we're talking specifically about requests, there's like things that I'd like to see in terms of research, in terms of like how people are using requests. Are they using it directly, which could be made the case that it's just because it's a great name and there's a lot of material, and there's a decade of blog posts saying to use requests, or is it mostly that it's installed via dependencies? I wonder if NPM can extract that data for us automatically, like show it on the package page. When it shows install count, can it know whether it's being installed directly or whether it's being installed as a transient dependency?
I don't think the registry has a way of knowing that, right? Because the registry is serving
Just counts the tarball downloads.
documents and tarballs, right? And there's no like, here's the intent behind what I'm downloading, right? It's just a glorified CDN.
Maybe NPM, but then you get into,
yeah, you can probably maybe
issues.
Well, you could extrapolate that from like take all the dependency downloads and subtract that from the total downloads, and then whatever remains is direct downloads. So that's one thing that I'd like to think about, because that immediately differentiates the path you can need to take if you want to modernize it. There's, aside from the separate discussion, like, do you need to modernize? But that tells you how to modernize. Do you need to focus on existing packages that use it, or do you need to focus on people who use it directly?
That's a really good point, because if it's all from, like it's almost like you could see a package that uses a deprecated package being tainted in some way, or.
So that's one question. The other question is request has at least one or two forks that are being maintained that I'm aware of. I don't know how widely used those are, but I think at least one of those was in a fairly prominent namespace, which I don't remember. And whether, I mean, this is a lot of throwing the ball back onto NPM, but exposing these forks as good forks, like, here's a package that has 20 million downloads, but here's a fork which has 1 million downloads. That doesn't have the deprecated warning, right?
Like related packages that are more active than this package, right?
It's not
Some
even
sort of-
necessarily related. Like some of those are direct forks,
Right.
with just a couple of dependency upgrades. So I assume something like UUID, which is deprecated and at version 7 now, whereas request is using version 3. So yeah.
There's another thought that I had. We were talking about, transitive dependencies versus direct dependencies. If you're directly adding, say, a request or another deprecated package to your project, maybe we should make that we could have some sort of feature in the CLI itself. It's like you have to force this, right? You have to force this. And if it's a transitive dependency, we have the warning like we do today, right? And so it's like, yeah, you're directly adding to your project a deprecated package. You have to use force to do that. I mean, that's a potential. We could make an RFC for it and have some discussion around that.
Yeah, that
sounds very reasonable.
Because that's like a lot, probably people may not realize or
Right. They're following a guide on a blog post, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was just a similar RFC we were just talking about is, because like we're saying, the package manager probably has a lot more insight into the relationship of your dependencies. And we were just talking about one recently about something you might not even know from reading the GitHub is this package depends on a link to GitHub. It's not even coming from the registry, right? Like you might not even know that until you install it, but then the package manager could be like, hey, ding, 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 just know what you're getting yourself into at this time. So, maybe these
that's
are
another
ideas
good
that
one.
can manifest in the package manager somehow just through feedback and, knowing at the point of entry what's going on exactly when you run it instead of, an old, because you can look at NPM and, all the dependencies shift in the past month, and that's where the sneaky stuff comes in, maybe some downstream that updated a version.
Yeah, and even I don't know, like some of these might be policies that like an organization would want to apply, like because we wrote something called NP check just to say like we have a reference architecture where we say, okay, here's the experience from across IBM and Red Hat, here's the modules we're using. And then to sort of keep a sniff check on them, we wrote this tool which looks and tries to figure out like, are there any red flags? And why I'm thinking about this now is one of those is like, well, obviously if it's deprecated, it's not something we should be telling people they want to use. The other one that I think we came across is the one that Owen also mentioned is like, if you've got a link that's actually going to GitHub to pull it, it's like, whoa, that's like crazy dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the one instance where when we were renaming the primary branch in node to main, like most of those went fine, but there was one thing, and I can't remember what it is now, but we renamed that thing and it somehow had a link to some dependency, 10 layers down that had a direct link, or no, it was an external package that had a direct link to something in the node project. And it was from Git and it had the actual, it had the primary branch hard coded into it. And it's like, basically you're getting the latest all the time. And now you're broken because we changed the name of it, right? Even so.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it just makes me think, yeah, some of those things that we've checking really resonate that you mentioned. And even like I could see somebody wanting a policy that says, if the package managers were involved, it's like, now I want my strict policy. Nothing deprecated, nothing, that has these funny links that are not links.
No non-registry URIs, right?
Yeah. And like I even like the check we put in place was just as the top level one deprecated, but now I'm thinking, because it's always hard, like, do you check just the module that you've said you've had success for, or do you check all of its dependencies? And we've checked some for except for vulnerabilities, we've mostly said we're just checking the top level ones.
Mm-hmm.
But every deprecated dependency in that chain is a particular problem where if there's a vulnerability reported, you're never going to be able to cut it off because you're never going to get an update, right? So you almost want to flag the one above it that isn't deprecated and say, well, hey, wait a sec, somehow, how can we encourage that module to move from the deprecated one, right?
Mhm.
I think
Because
one
would
thing-
today, if you if you installed X that has Y, would it just tell you that Y is deprecated, or would it tell you that X is doing something not so great by including the deprecated Y?
You'll get a warning even if it's a transitive dependency.
Right, but my point is, like, does the module that pulled in the deprecated thing get some negative press?
I don't think so.
Right, because that's like another thing that would make sense is like, because the deprecated, they've done what they were supposed to do.
Right.
It's the people who continue to use them, and maybe it's like it hasn't been updated for a long time, so it's not necessarily, it's not like they owe us anything, right? But
Or you
that's where
resolve
we want
to
the
an
change
older
to happen,
version.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you've resolved to an older version of said package, right? And maybe it's in a new major, it's not
Right.
deprecated anymore, right? So it's using a different package.
I think though, I think maybe I think what's interesting is throughout our conversation so far, and I think kind of maybe where the intent of this PRs or this issue is good, but I think maybe is maybe looking at the wrong insight is it seems purely focused on the technology. It seems to be saying like a lot of the examples are, well, it's not using fetch, or this new API exists, and this so I think the direction or the substance of this conversation is helpful, because I think like, is that really where the vulnerability is going to necessarily happen? Because I'm decided my package is using HTTP directly instead of fetch. This is kind of why I think where some of the conversations happening in NPM are interesting, because it is trying to, it's not looking at the tech, it's literally just looking at, fairly obvious issues in your dependency chain, like the non-registry URLs or things like that. So I think even Beth was, so I think maybe the question to volley back with is, again, what does modernization mean? Because it seems to imply that, yes, projects get old and people kind of move away from them, and maybe someone else forks and whatnot. That's fair in a like window shopping sense, but is it like so I don't know, that seems to be the main premise of this, is that old APIs bad, new APIs good, but that doesn't seem to be necessarily relevant to the substance of the post, which is things are old and things are new. But is it really because of the APIs they use per se? Or, I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's maybe subjective, like, does any, or a lot of, I don't know. I guess I'm rambling, but I don't know, maybe it seems that the post is more focused on the specific APIs being used as opposed to the higher level discussion around what do we do about, like, I guess maybe with request specifically deprecated packages that still get a lot of high traffic. That seems a little more actionable in terms of like, don't use it because it's not maintained at all. Don't use it because it uses, fs.sync instead of fs, promises, like, are those really the those really is that really the grand level of granularity we want to be passing judgment on, so to speak. I don't really evaluate that per se, and so and to me that's where the conversation at Collab Summit could happen, is like, how do we get how do we sorry.
Yeah, I think your point, like, there's kind of two very different things maybe covered there. One which is like, hey, we have newer APIs. How do you convince people to move up to the latest and greatest? But that's really quite different than how do we convince people to stop using things which are no longer alive, or whatever you want to,
Yeah, that's the reason to stop using requests, is because it's no longer maintained, not because of the API choices potentially. I mean, if they still work, they still work. Maybe it's a millisecond slower in production, but or just like because it uses CJS. I mean, yeah, it might pose an interoperability problem with a newer tool, but that's not necessarily a indicator of, I don't know. I think modernization is something that happens as ecosystems grow naturally. Eventually Node gets enough of these neat APIs and someone's like, yeah, I'm gonna write the next. I mean, see it with like bundlers and stuff like that. The ecosystem churns just as experience grows, and like ESM unlocks a lot of things, and now there's a whole lot of next generation bundlers and stuff like that. But you see people building companies off of Webpack still, so or hiring the maintainer to do things like that. So I guess if this was to go into a conversation, is the focus less on the APIs and more on the maybe the more glaring or more obvious signals like package deprecated, so but otherwise I don't feel I need to tell people to stop using Express. I've played around with new things, but I wouldn't say not use it. Just like I said, but go back to the beginning of this conversation, it's just maybe it's relevant in your decision making to know that it hasn't had like a major version in a couple of years, but even that maybe belies the story, because maybe they've been doing a bunch of point releases and it doesn't have HTTP2, but maybe perfectly fine for a little side project, or you just want to learn how to write a web server. You're not going to ship it around for VC funding anytime soon, and if you do, then whatever, evaluate the landscape again or something. I don't know, I feel like when it comes to technology, maybe people like when I evaluated something like Koa, I was simply looking for async, so I evaluated based on the technical criteria, but that was because that's what I wanted at the time. So I don't know. I just hate to pick winners and losers over maybe potentially arbitrary point of API decision. Feel like there's bigger signals to so I don't know, but I guess maybe add as a topic, because if there are signals, it'd be great to feed them into the CLI where there's things like deprecated non-registry tarballs, like really big flags can actually be surfaced. Not like, hey, this is still using fs.sync, I'm like,
yeah, like if the new APIs are good enough or better enough, they should just
maybe
be
if the
adopted.
APIs are deprecated, something like that. But like, hey, we found that this will just totally pwn your system. Don't use XYZ, or shift up to node version or something. But gets gray, and as Nathan said, it's not like a singular problem here, but I think it would be good to take the hints and signals that something like npm builds into it, and then maybe make a document in the package maintenance docs about like, how to understand what, deprecated means, how to understand what the impact of not using a non-registry tarball means. I mean, it might be covered in the docs, but it couldn't hurt to, aggregate some of those and turn that into like a doc that someone can use based on, things that actually have been folded into tools, so as like a guide or a companion to, your usage of tools that provide actionable information.
I kind of like the way Nathan characterized it as helping maintainers or users make a good decision.
Yeah.
Because I think like there's that, I think, which is also like, I don't know that there's a problem or it's a feature, but like the tendency for everybody to want to create something new and different means that, like, typically I think that's good, except that means we then fragment our effort so much that like having 10 things that have 1/10 of the effort put into each of those 10 things probably would be not as good as 2 or 3. Like I'm not going to advocate for one, right? Like I don't want to choose one winner, but we probably have an easier time if like there were 2 good strong ones with lots of activity versus 10 with a little, right? And I think we sort of tend towards that 10. At least that's the way I get the feeling some days. And it kind of comes back to like helping the maintainers make good decisions. If we could say, choose one of the tried and like you went back to Express, right? It's tried, it's tested, it still works, it's still maintained enough that there aren't security vulnerabilities. And it's kind of one of those things, if it does what you need, you're probably not making a bad decision. And you might find something else which is like got all sorts of fancy new things, but will and maybe is maintained today, but has much higher risk because tomorrow it might not be. So I think having like maybe turning this into a discussion at the Collab Summit that's like helping maintainers make good decisions would be an interesting way to go.
Yeah.
And, it opens up the discussions like Nathan was saying, there's things in the CLI that could help surface some existing information. What do we think? Is there even consensus on what a good decision is? Right. And like, is it something that the project, like you went back to, like, should the node project even weigh into this? Right. Like we could maybe be the place to allow people to come together and collaborate on something. But like, I don't think we'd want the project to be like, I don't know if we'd even have like a, hey, here's the I could see us coming up with guidance on how to make a choice or tools that help surface what we think is the important information versus saying X versus Y, right? Like that would be much more useful and much more independent to say, here's the metrics we look at. Here's how these things score. Make your own decision, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is like it's private companies that are trying to create solutions to this because they're the ones with the funding and motivation to do so, like Feroz's group or security companies, research companies, or registry hosts themselves, right? They're the ones with the funding and motivation to do something about this. So yeah, we can be a discussion point, but I think it's pretty hard to say like, this is the overall solution to this problem. Yeah.
I think what would be great is if we could somehow help the conversation so that it was like, what is it that's good practice? And again, maybe this will, be the secret sauce of some of these companies, right? But like back to, we tried to get going that CVE, vulnerability reporting collaboration space. And I think that would be the perfect place if we could actually bring together the people to collaborate and say, this is the data that makes sense. And here's a format that could be shared by maintainers, right? So I publish a package. If I get a vulnerability report, I look at it and say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because, the dependency I don't use that. If there was a standard way for that maintainer to report that, then the tooling could actually really leverage that. And maybe, different companies could find ways to leverage it better or worse. But today it's, I think Nathan mentioned lack of information, right? Or lack of ways even for us to share the information is as big a problem as anything.
Well, lack of conceptualizing it too, right? Like what data points do we combine into a single metric that helps people like understand, good, bad scale, like,
Right.
this package, right? There's no way to sort this because
Right.
there's no obvious formula for the data.
No. And, like I said, we've got our NP check, which tries to run a bunch of checks. And another company might have another set. I'd be interested if we had 3 or 4 companies who all have their own set of checks. It'd be interesting to understand and share that kind of information, because it's a really hard problem to look at something and say, it's more of a red flag versus non-red flag kind of thing versus a black and white, here's your yes or no answer, right?
Yeah, I was actually just typing that in. It's like, it's not really about what's modern, but what's risky. And risk can come from a varying amount of criteria. One could be like API or technology choice, but another could be, dependency choice 0 to 100, or maintenance activity or whatever. So and some of these things a package manager can help you out with. Other things, maybe it's more of I need to have my own risk matrix, and as I'm comparing 2 or 3 things, I kind of see what checks the box and what doesn't, and then I go from there. So it's like we could provide some of that supporting information that can maybe help you flesh out your own personal risk matrix. But at the end of the day, it's your choice, and I can't fault you for still using Express today. So because maybe that's falls within your risk matrix, and there's nothing objectively wrong with it other than maybe it's slowed down a little bit, but it's still perfectly usable. But again, that might be in your and so maybe it's like maybe it's just a matter of also categorizing like subjective versus objective risks. You might weigh release activity more because it's a brand new project versus like a tutorial. So I don't know if that helps at all. Yeah.
I think we should move on because we're almost near the end. But I think we could, from what I understand of our discussion, we could probably, and correct me, anybody who's here, like I don't hear any enthusiasm in terms of trying to wade into, hey, you should move to a promise-based API versus this other API in terms of the modern, like that for me is like, people should decide that on their own on the merits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we might respond in there like, there's not really enthusiasm for that. The other part, which is, some of the things called out goes into is like the older modules that, if they're truly deprecated or higher risk, figuring out how we surface and share that risk, that's something that might be interesting for us to talk about and work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and summarize that, and people make sure whatever I post in there reflects what you're thinking as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be it's I don't know if it's solvable, but I think it's an interesting topic to talk about and see if there's ideas and stuff, because we may come up with something interesting.
Just the old GI Joe mantra, or the NBC, right? The more you know, kind of thing.
Yep.
Because I'd personally rather have a more educated consumer base than, you know, one that's gonna parrot like our potentially artificial signals, like you know, sync
Yeah.
versus async or something like that, you know.
Sounds good. Okay, so the next one, 2022 promotion of events. I don't think there's an update there. Okay, let's see. I think Vostrek did submit a talk, but I don't think it was accepted from what I remember seeing of the agenda. And really our next event is kind of the OpenJS World Collab Summit. So I'm not sure there's anything to discuss this week on this one. The team membership audit, number 497. This one I'm looking through this.
Yeah.
There's a related PR, right? Go ahead, Dominicus.
We merged the PR, which cleaned up the members file.
Yep.
But we did not remove the same people from the package maintenance team on
Okay.
the organization, which we probably want to do. So I posted a list of folks that are no longer on the members MD, but are still on the team.
Okay.
So we should probably clean that up, save them some notifications, and
Right.
I
So
don't know
anybody
I don't
be
know
able
what
to do
permissions
that, right?
that does that team. I don't have access to that.
You don't? Okay. Package
I can
maintenance.
see the list of members, but I cannot change them.
Let me just go to no. And I'm looking at where are teams? No, teams. Okay, that's not okay, down here. Okay, members. So I'm going to find you and I'm going to make your role a maintainer. So you should be able to remove people now.
Just see. No, I got it. Oh, I got a nice badge. Can I remove people? 30 members selected. Yes, I can remove people from the team. Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll sync that up.
Okay.
And then I'll close this issue.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so status and updates for PKGS create. Don't know if there's any updates on that. I think last time we did give access to Zach, right?
Yep.
Okay, did we tell him that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right. Should we leave this open on the agenda or should we wait for, you know, when Zach makes progress to come back? What do we think on that? I'm okay either way, just wondering.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can leave it until
Okay.
at least we get
Okay,
some
we'll leave that
news
on.
from someone. I mean, we can remove it if we don't hear back a little bit later.
And then the last issue is just a list of modules to get support info in. This one I'll just mention again. I think it relates to our earlier discussion about like trying to give more info to the people choosing modules. You know, so that's maybe part of that larger discussion.
Yeah, and also Jordan posted that he's willing to add it to his packages, but we need to double check where our tooling is.
Okay. What tooling part was, you mean like the PKGS?
He was looking for a one-liner command I can run to make all changes required. So it's basically to create that, and then, yeah, do we have a tooling that creates the support thing? I think somebody was working on that, but I don't remember.
We have, well, yeah, we have a tool called support.
Yeah.
And PKG support create. I guess the question is, does he want to add them to all things, or?
No, he said he just needs to make changes that are required in a Git working directory. So if there's a create command, then maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, like here, let me just share. Do you think? Oops.
Oh, I need to update this.
Well, here's the link. Well, here, no, I'll share screen. I can find that. Right, like here's the command line usage where you can show, validate, and create.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're all the same, he pretty much can create one and reuse it, I believe. But yeah, you would have to add it to your package JSON then. So how about I can paste this in and we can see
Thanks.
if there's anything more that, so let me stop sharing. Oh, okay. Where did he mention that? Somewhere else?
Last post on the issue.
Comment.
Issue 413.
Or 413. Okay, sorry. I was looking at 458, which is the wrong one. Okay. Okay, perfect. I'll type that in there. Okay, and I think we're at time. So thanks for everybody for taking the time. Is there anything we should talk about before we close out for today?
You said you're gonna summarize in the modernization issue itself. Okay.
Yeah, I'll try and make a comment in that. Basically, not much appetite for X, more appetite for Y. And I'll paste that when I'm putting together the minutes later on today.
Okay, cool. I had some comments, so I'll build on top of yours.
Or if you want to summarize, I'd also be happy if you want to go ahead and do it.
Sure, whichever works. I
Go for it.
don't want to say the wrong thing.
No, you can go. I mean, go for it.
All right, yeah, I'll probably do it a little bit later after my meetings, but yeah, basically I was just gonna say, just try to thread the needle between subjective and objective criteria, and maybe less on the technical and more on the clearer signals, that kind of thing.
The risk managing.
Yes, exactly.
Risk
the risk being the key word in the comment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Sounds good. I'll post that up.
No, thanks for volunteering to do that.
Sure. Yeah. No problem.
Okay. We'll see everybody later.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Nathan, for coming. Bye.
Yep. Thanks.